memory is a monster, you forget it doesn't. It simply files things away, it keeps things for you or hides things from you and summons them to your recall with a will of its own. You think you have a memory, but it has you. The brain and its parts have always been one of my fascinations, and here recently I have researched what exactly our memory is and read articles about it. Memory is a subject that is quite frequently misunderstood, but is vital to the day-to-day livelihood. I'll inform you of what memory is, how it works, and the history of the origins of memory. First, I will discuss the memory and what it is exactly. Memory is our ability to encode, store, retain, and recall information and past experiences in the brain. There are three different types: long-term, short-term, and sensory. Long-term memory is intended for storage of information over a long period of time. Despite how much we usually forget from day to day, it seems like long-term memory decays very little over time. Long-term memory usually stores information based on meaning and association. However, it is also said that long-term memory can be depicted by sound. Short-term memory is like a temporary recall of information, which is being processed at any point in time. Short-term memory holds a small amount of information, typically 7 items or less, in a very short period of time, usually around 10 to 15 seconds. Information in your short-term memory will quickly disappear forever unless you make a conscious effort to retain it. Short-term memory can be transferred into long-term memory, but only with mental repetition or more effective giving the information a strong meaning or association. Sensory memory is the shortest term element of memory. It is able to retain impressions of sensory information about the original stimuli after they have ended. Stimuli in our 5 senses, sight, touch, taste, hearing, and smell, can either be deliberately ignored or perceived. If perceived, they go into our sensory memory. Perceiving sensory memory is outside of our conscious control. It happens automatically and cannot be rehearsed. It is ultra short, which is usually anywhere between 200 to 500 milliseconds. Since it is so short, it is sometimes seen as part of the process of perception, but nevertheless is known as sensory memory. Now that I've discussed the memory itself, I will go into detail about how it works. The brain is a very confusing and a very complex organ. This is what the memory goes through to work. Encoding is the first step in creating a memory. When you come in contact with a person, for example, any sort of sensation that had occurred will travel to a part of your brain called the hippocampus. Experts believe that the hippocampus, along with the frontal cortex, is responsible for analyzing sensory inputs and deciding whether or not they're worth remembering. If the sensory inputs are worth remembering, they'll be sent to your long-term memory. A memory begins with perception, but isn't completely about perception. It is encoded and stored using electricity and chemicals. Nerve cells will connect with other cells at one point, and that is called a synapse. A synapse is where all the action in your brain occurs, and that's what this picture is, showing all the synapses in your brain and when they meet. Where electrical impulses carrying messages, they leap across gaps between the cells. These connections in the brain cells aren't set in concrete, however, they will be changing all the time. As you learn and experience more in the world, the synapses and dendrites in your brain will have changes that occur, which will create more connections. As one brain cell sends signals to another, the synapse between the two will get stronger. The more signals, the stronger that the connection grows. This means that with each new experience, your brain will physically slightly rewire its structure. It is this flexibility, called plasticity, that can help your brain rewire itself if it's ever damaged. You have to be paying attention to correctly encode a memory. However, most things that you encounter every day is simply filtered out because you can't pay attention to everything. How you pay attention to information could be the most important factor in your memory and how much of it you actually remember. Now that we have learned about how the memory works, I will discuss the history of the origins of memory. There have been hundreds and hundreds of scientific studies about our memories and how they came to be. Hermann Ebbinghaus spent 2-year-long periods studying the limits of human memory with only one experimental participant, which was himself. He had decided that the best way to start would be to invent completely new things to try to remember. He created over 2,000 nonsense syllables formed by using 19 consonants for the starting sound, 11 vowels for the middle sound, and 11 consonants for the ending sound. As you might expect, the longer the series, the longer it took to memorize. What's notable about this study isn't really about the conclusions he drew from it, but the fact that he was the first person to attempt a systematic experimental study of memory, and he actually devised his own system of accounting for error. The study of memory dates back to at least 2,000 years ago to Aristotle's early attempts to understand memory. In his treatise On the Soul, he compared the human mind to a blank slate and theorized that all humans are born free of any knowledge and are merely the sum of their experiences. He compared memory to making impressions in wax. This is sometimes compared to as the storehouse metaphor. This is a theory of memory which held sway for many centuries. Carl Lashley devoted 25 years of his life to research on memory. With advances in technology in the 1940s, a field of neuropsychology emerged with theories of encoding. Lashley did his research on rats in mazes using a systematic attempt to pinpoint where memory traces are formed in the brain. He concluded in 1950 that memory is not localized to exactly one part of the brain, but is widely distributed all throughout the cortex. He also concluded that if certain parts of the brain are damaged, other parts of the brain may take on the damaged portions. Today, I first discussed the memory itself. I discussed how the memory works and the origins of the history of memory. Memory is always going to be an important part of our lives. It's important to know about. In conclusion, the memory is a huge part of the brain. Within the brain, there are synapses and dendrites that will make connections to form 3 separate types of memory: long-term, short-term, and sensory, and that there were lots of studies that went on throughout the years. Thank you.